Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football, Kansas football, top 10 players heading into 2024. And before we get into this top 10 list, I want to ask the Kansas Jayhawk fans a question. And that is, does this team feel special heading into 2024? As I'm doing my prep and kind of watching some games back from 2023, looking at this team, kind of taking my deep dive, I look at this team and say, it reminds me a heck of a lot of kind of this Michigan team going into last year, where you look at the bulk of these top 10 players, they have been with this program for the last couple of years. They've been taking those small incremental steps in the right direction. And you look at the schedule, very favorable for Kansas. And if this team stays healthy, I'm not necessarily saying they're going to win a national championship, but in terms of winning a Big 12 championship, going to the college football playoffs, I think that is a very realistic possibility for Kansas in an era of college football where it just seems like every program is a revolving door using the transfer portal. This Kansas team, most of their best players have been within this program for the last couple of years and have played a ton of football. And so not only do I think the talent is in a good spot in terms of winning a Big 12 championship, I think this team, from a culture, from a quote unquote vibe standpoint, is certainly a contender to win the Big 12 as well. And when you start matching up talented roster, culture, that's normally when you get special seasons. That's kind of how I feel about this Kansas team heading into 2024. Fired up to get into the list. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys. And it's been just an absolute blast taking deep dives into all of these programs over the last couple of weeks. The amount of support has been absolutely amazing. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And for the Kansas Jayhawk fans, I would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. There were a lot of players that I left off this list. If you think I'm sleeping on a player that needs to be in the top 10, would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. I learn always just a ton from you guys in this preseason kind of time period. And without further ado, let's get into this one. And let's start with one of the best running backs in the country. And I was kind of putting together the Big 12 running backs this year. It's silly. I mean, you got Ollie Gordon at Oklahoma State, RJ Harvey at UCF, Taj Brooks at Texas Tech, Devin Neal at Kansas. The running back position in the Big 12 is incredibly talented, and we're looking at one of the most talented ones in the country heading into 2024 in Devin Neal. Not only does the production stand out, I mean, over 1,200 yards, 16 touchdowns, 6.3 yards per carry, but you look at how this Kansas team is predicated on offense. They want to hit the explosive play. There's no better running back in the country to give you those explosive plays than a guy like Devin Neal, who kind of, for lack of better terms, a human joystick when he gets to the second level. I don't know how many running backs in the country there are better than Devin Neal. I think he deals with contact a little bit better. Kind of going back and watching some 2023 film again, I knew he was one of the most shifty running backs in the country. How he deals with contact, that's really impressive too. 737 yards after contact. I think this is one of the better running backs in the country heading into 2024. The number one player for this Kansas team. Going into number two, let's go quarterback Jaylen Daniels. And when Jaylen Daniels is healthy and he's playing his best football, I don't know how many quarterbacks I'm taking over Jaylen Daniels, not only in the Big 12, but in the country. I think it just comes down to, can Jaylen Daniels stay healthy for 12, 13, 14 games? And if he does, there's not a team on this Kansas schedule that Kansas can't beat. And so I am extremely fired up to see a healthy Jaylen Daniels in 2024. One of those guys that, just as a pure college football fan myself, I just want to see him play. He's one of the more electric players in all of college football. So if he stays healthy, I'm going to be a massive fan of the Kansas Jayhawks. Jaylen Daniels coming in at number two. Number three, let's go to cornerback Kobe Bryant. And I think what's kind of crazy about this Kansas team is you look at all three of the names that we just talked about. One, have been with this program for a very long time. But I think more importantly, these are three All-American caliber guys, right? Devin Neal, one of the best running backs. Jaylen Daniels, one of the best quarterbacks. Kobe Bryant, one of the best cornerbacks that you see in the country. And I think what's crazy about Kobe Bryant and what makes me love him so much is teams just stopped throwing to him. He faced only 37 targets all year. He was a guy that can just take away a half of the field. And when you have a cornerback that can take away a wide receiver one, a half of a field for this defense. It allows you to get so creative, and you have some safeties and guys like OJ Burrows and Marvin Grant that you can come and put into the box and get a little bit aggressive with how you use those kind of guys, because on one side, Kobe Bryant is kind of just locking down that half of the field. And I think what's really fun for Kansas fans is number 4, Melo Dobson. He's arguably, I was kind of going back and forth. Now I went with Kobe Bryant, but Melo Dobson is one of the better cornerbacks, in the Big 12 as well. 4 interceptions, 11 pass breakups. I believe he had 2 pick sixes. Now, he was the guy that was facing a lot of targets because teams that were playing Kansas didn't want to throw to Kobe Bryant. Melo Dobson faced 69 targets, only gave up a 59% completion percentage, has played over 1,900 snaps. Again, all of these guys have played just so much football for this Kansas team, and that's kind of what makes me think this is going to be a special season. It kind of just sounds like everything is coming together over the last couple of years. You have, in my mind, one of the best cornerback rooms that you see in the country with Melo Dobson and Kobe Bryant. Going into our number 5 player, and this was just impossible for me to kind of pick and choose. You got 3 wide receivers in Lawrence Arnold, Skinner, and Luke Grimm. If you want to put Luke Grimm ahead of this guy, however you want to stack these 3 wide receivers, I'm certainly not arguing with it. And you look at Jaylen Daniels, these 3 wide receivers, they've played just so much football over the last couple of years. Lawrence Arnold, the career numbers, 121 catches, 1,800 yards, 13 touchdowns, only 9 career drops. You look at these 3 Kansas wide receivers, they get open, they win vertically down the field, they let Kansas hit those explosive plays in the passing attack, and they don't drop footballs. What else can you ask for a Kansas wide receiver room that none of these 3 wide receivers necessarily stand out to the national media because all 3 of these wide receivers get incorporated so much in the offense. These are 3, in my mind, legitimate wide receiver ones that it's kind of hard to take away all 3 of these wide receivers for this Kansas offense. Lawrence Arnold, I went with 5, will go 6, Quinton Skinner. And what I love about Quinton Skinner, just a big, physically imposing wide receiver that can work vertically down the field. We talk about this Kansas offense. It is predicated on hitting explosive plays. Quinton Skinner is one of those guys that lets you hit some of those explosive plays. Only 1 career drop during the last couple of years. That is kind of a ludicrous number when you're talking about an average reception of 20 yards and you only have 1 career drop on your career, not season. Those are some special numbers for Quinton Skinner. And then number 7, Luke Grimm. This is you could argue Luke Grimm is the best wide receiver on this football team. 126 catches, 1,700 yards, 17 touchdowns, only 6 career drops. And I think what stood out to me about Luke Grimm last year, he got a little bit explosive. And you'll look at Lawrence Arnold and Quinton Skinner. Those were kind of your explosive wide receivers. Luke Grimm was a little bit more of your safety blanket wide receiver. You go back to last year, 16.8 yards per catch. All 3 of these wide receivers averaged over 16 yards per catch. That is an absolutely ludicrous number. They all kind of do some different things, which I think makes it easier to get all 3 of them involved. I think you got Jaylen Daniels, who's one of the best quarterbacks in the country. And you got Devin Neal and Daniel Highshaw, who didn't even make this list, but he is certainly one of the better running backs in the country. And then you look at these 3 wide receivers, gives this Kansas offense just so many different ways it can attack opposing defenses. Going into number 8, and this was just a massive get for Kansas. Bryce Foster coming in, going to be the starting center for this Kansas team. And I think Bryce Foster is a damn good football player who is a former 5-star recruit coming out of high school, has played a ton of football in the SEC during his first 3 years at Texas A&M. But why I think this is so big is not only do you get a legitimate all-conference caliber center, but I think more importantly, it kind of allows you to put your best 5 on the offensive line, right? You brought in some intriguing offensive linemen through the transfer portal. Bryce Foster slotting in at center, I think, gives Kansas a lot of flexibility in terms of how they want to build this offensive line to really get your best 5 on the football field. So you get a really good center, but I think you make the rest of the offensive line better. This was a massive pickup for Kansas in the transfer portal. Going to number 9, Let's talk about safety Marvin Grant. I think the thing I love most about Marvin Grant is the 6.6% missed tackle rate. That is extremely hard to find when you look at a safety that plays in the box as much as Marvin Grant, kind of built like a linebacker. And these kind of players are so important where you look at Marvin Grant in the responsibilities that he has within this Kansas defense. He is asked to stop the run, come and play in the box. He's asked to play that free safety role. At times, he's asked to play that nickel corner spot and deal with tight ends or slot wide receivers. And he kind of does all of those things at a really high level. Having these, for lack of a better term, defensive chess pieces in your defense is massive in this modern era of college football, especially with the variety of teams that you're going to see in the Big 12. One week you might play Texas Tech that wants to spread you out, throw the ball all over the yard. Then the next week you might be playing Utah, and Utah wants to play some bully ball, 12 personnel. Marvin Grant's a guy that can give you really good traits playing both of those kind of teams. Going to number 10, another safety in O.J. Burrows. Again, a guy that's just played a ton of football. Every single player that we just talked about for Kansas in this top 10, a lot of these guys could be in the NFL had they wanted to be. They come back to Kansas. They've all played a ton of football. O.J. Burrows, 1 interception, 4 pass breakups, does a lot of different things. More of that kind of traditional free safety for Kansas. But again, a guy that has played a ton of football. You see the instincts on the field. Big fan of O.J. Burrows. And I think this is probably one of the most important conversations to have, and that is the guys that you can't put in the top 10 yet, but very well could be top 10 players. And these are the players that I think you look at Kansas and say, if these guys break out, you're probably looking at a Big 12 championship team. The first guy you got to talk about is Bryant, former 5-star recruit or former top 100 recruit, coming back to Kansas from Michigan State. He played his true freshman year, didn't play a ton. We kind of knew he wasn't going to play a ton. You take a look at the kind of prospect that Bryant was. This kid was all traits, wasn't necessarily the best football player yet. He was a guy that you were betting on the development going into year 2. Can he emerge as a dominant edge rusher for this Kansas team? There's an argument to say that Bryant is athletically the most gifted player on this Kansas roster. Can he put it together and provide that pass rush for Kansas? That's a massive storyline. You have to replace Austin Booker somehow. I think you have a guy in Bryant. I think you have a guy in Jeremy Robinson, 2 guys that athletically are extremely gifted football players. If they can put it on the field and give this Kansas Jayhawks defense a pass rush behind a secondary that I think is one of the best in the country, that's kind of the recipe for Kansas on defense. Logan Brown, former 5-star offensive tackle. We all know he has the traits. It sounds like he put it together during spring practice. Can he break out, become an all-conference caliber offensive lineman for Kansas? That's another question. You kind of know Kansas has a really high floor. Like, they're just not going to lose a lot of football games this year if they do stay healthy. These kind of guys, the Bryants, the Jeremy Robinsons, I think those are the players that if this Kansas team goes out and wins 10-plus games and wins a Big 12 title, you're probably looking at breakout years from some of these guys. I am fascinated by this Kansas team. Again, would love to hear from you guys on some players that I might be sleeping on. Appreciate y'all checking it out. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If you guys do enjoy the content, again, consider subscribing to the channel. Kansas team that we're going to be talking a lot about come 2024. Appreciate you guys. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.